Thank you so much, Lindsay. Can you hear me? Okay, all right. I'm going to also attempt to share my screen. Okay, can we see this okay? Okay, thank you for the thumbs up. Good morning. I'm delighted to be here. I love this teaching showcase every year, and it's exciting to be a part of the first virtual one. So thank you so much to my colleagues at the CTL for this invitation. I wanted to talk today about a teaching experience I had this past fall when I taught an elective course entitled Performance in Times of Crisis for our mostly fourth year drama and a few music students. I'm interested in affect-related questions about learning that emerged from my final assignment in this course around the incredible benefits, but also the ethics of asking students to express or perform personal investment. Over the past several years, I've become increasingly interested in the subtleties of student affect, engagement, as we're talking about in this session, and motivation, these rather intangible propensities that nevertheless significantly impact teaching and learning in higher education, as we all know. I've been deeply inspired recently, for example, by Susan Bloom's work in her book Ungrading, specifically the writing around motivation by her contributing authors, and also by the work of Paul Hansted, who in Creating Wicked Students makes the argument that connecting to life beyond the classroom is crucial for creating and inspiring engaged students who will, as he writes, quote, step into the world as more active participants, end quote. Most directly, perhaps, I also situate this work in Bloom's affective taxonomy, a domain concerned with student motivation and with emotional or affective demonstrations of engagement. And that's represented here in this combined taxonomy. And it's the top level with the internalization of value that I'm interested most, and that I was trying to get at in this final assignment, which I will describe in a moment here. So this is where students are asked to internalize and then perform their adoption of a particular value. Motivation, engagement, and enthusiasm for one's field of study are important all the time, of course, but I would suggest that they are particularly important at this particular time because of the unmooring effects of the COVID pandemic on our students. This disillusionment is perhaps even more acutely felt by our students in the performing arts who have watched and who continue to watch this industry crumble in truly devastating ways since March 2020. And this is just an infographic from the I Lost My Gig survey, which just shows that, the devastating effects of COVID on the arts industry. So it seemed necessary to offer something this past fall that inspired students and allowed them to prepare themselves to take a position of agency in a future that was and still is very unpredictable. In addition to sharing some of the exciting theory around the nature and uniqueness of performance, one of my learning outcomes for the course focused on giving students practical skills to advocate for performance's value, with the idea that they would be required to do so in an articulate way at some point as teachers, grant writers, music directors, actors, singers, etc. So I wanted to give them practice doing this with the skills and ideas that we learned about in the class. Much of the course was spent in a traditional seminar course format, with students reading articles and using perusal to engage in conversations with their peers around each reading's central ideas. And I loved perusal and do hope the university continues its subscription to this tool because I thought it was fabulous. We read Jill Dolan's Utopia in Performance. We read the intro to Thomas Torino's Music as Social Life, as well as articles about artistic responses to 9/11, the climate crisis, Black Lives Matter, etc. We also invited artists to come to our class to engage in conversations with us about their work on this topic. So we had Andrew Kushner come to talk about his Radical Hope project with at-risk youth in Toronto, and we read his article on how theater humanizes audiences, which you can see at the top of the screen there, I think. We also had Algonquin playwright Yvette Nolan and Muscadet First Nation musician Lancelot Knight of Saskatoon come to talk about their 2016 verbatim play Reasonable Doubt about the murder of Indigenous youth Colton Boushie by RCMP officers. So this again is probably another benefit of all of this online teaching, that we were able to invite all of these artists from across the country to engage. Throughout the course, students had the opportunity to demonstrate their mastery of the theoretical material, But it wasn't until the final assignment that I really saw the impact of this work on them. So, for the final assignment, students were tasked with choosing between either an impassioned monologue or a COVID-19 inspired performance, both of which were required to respect COVID-19 social distancing protocols, of course. These were video performances, and they were presented live in class and were accompanied by a brief analysis or reflection paper, as well as a self-assessment. So for this assignment, students were asked explicitly to video record themselves speaking and or performing it as though they were making an impassioned plea to someone in power. And even in my rubrics, students were prompted to create performances that were, as you can see here, effective, dynamic, convincing. The listener cannot help but be moved. And then in the bottom one here, that the essay has a clear structure and is written persuasively. So these were things I wrote, into the rubric itself, which students saw before their preparation of the assignment. So I thought I would show you 3 short examples of the kinds of assignments that my students submitted for this final project. These are just brief clips from each of them, and these are all used with permission. And if you could just give me a thumbs up that the audio is working on these, that would be wonderful. So here's the first one. This is an impassioned monologue by Alicia Kupinski.
The arts allow us to look inward, but you don't want us to look inward because you're afraid that we will become emotionally intelligent. According to Thomas Torino, through the integration of the perceiver's imagination, physical reaction, and past experiences, watching performance allows one to feel closer to themselves and their own emotions. When we become emotionally intelligent, we are able to understand others, and you're afraid that we will be able to empathize. Performances like Reasonable Doubt, a documentary play with music that examines Indigenous race relations in Saskatchewan, produces empathy among the audience and participants. As composer Lancelot Knight explains,
changed my perspective on a lot of things I used to label and put in a certain box.
when we can empathize with those different from us, we feel solidarity. But you're afraid of oneness. When people can interlock sounds seamlessly together, it creates a deep bond or feeling of oneness. Jill Dolan explains this oneness as a feeling of communitas, or the moments in theater which participants feel themselves become part of the whole in a nearly spiritual way.
Okay, and this then is another example. This is an example from one of the dance students in our class.
Once upon a time, the US-Canadian border was closed. This meant a mother couldn't see her daughter. This meant siblings were forced to communicate only through phone calls, and cousins had no opportunity to see one another. Instead of holidays and annual family gatherings, there was only distance. Once upon a time, there was a grandmother who fell and broke 6 ribs and bruised her lungs. There was a grandfather who could only check in on his wife through phone calls. There were uncles who couldn't comfort their lonely father or visit their isolated mother. Instead of love and support, there was only distance. Once upon a time, there was a birth of a new baby, the first baby cousin, but the father couldn't even wait in the hospital with his wife, instead had to sit in a car in the cold.
Okay, and then finally, a final example. This is by Catherine Dion.
What is the value of performance in times of crisis? Where is performance's place in times of crisis? And how can performance survive in times of crisis? As artists, in order not only to survive, but to thrive in a time when it feels like our craft has been ripped away from us, we must start seeing our lives as the performance. Performance has a fluid quality. No 2 performances can ever be identical, much like our lives. And there is so little separation between the performers and an audience that when you're sitting in a room full of people watching a performance live, there is no way that you cannot see that the performers are living, breathing, feeling people just like you.
Okay. So I was really struck by the degree to which students demonstrated engagement and motivation in a way that I hadn't seen in other kinds of assignments or presentations or even performances. The commitment to their work and the ways they wove this work into their own personal narratives and experiences of the COVID pandemic was incredibly inspiring and exciting. And it also raised questions for me, questions around the ethics of prompting passion and engagement from my students. Maybe this is an awareness that I've developed this year teaching remotely, where I've had to educate myself and remind myself that there are many valid reasons that my dear students would want to keep their cameras off for the class and or choose to engage or disengage from various components of the class for a variety of reasons. My work continues with this project as I continue to understand more about the incredible value and also inherent tensions of affective modes of engagement and assessment. Thank you.